My name's John Bush. I'm here at PorcFest 2014, and I'm giving a talk on self-sufficiency, talking about some beginning steps and information, practical advice on how you can start growing your own food, how you can get into chicken raising, how you can do food storage, water storage, and we also touch on how not only we should strive to get off the grid when it comes to food, water, shelter, and energy, but we should also strive to get off the government grid, which means not relying on the central healthcare system, not relying on the police to solve our common problems, not relying on the courts to solve our disputes. So I think it's important for everyone to strive towards self-sufficiency and independence from centralized and coercive institutions in every aspect of their lives. So, my name's John Bush. I've been an activist for a little over a decade, dabbled in a lot of political activism, educating the public about various things. And more recently, starting in 2009, after I met Catherine, my lovely wife, both of us decided, if we want to find freedom in our lifetimes, or at least in our kids' lifetimes, we need to change what we're doing. We were just going hard in the paint with political activism, and it was frustrating, exhausting. We were broke, we were tired, and we didn't feel much more free. In fact, we were becoming less free, and we were becoming slaves to our own activism because we were so passionate about it. I was occupying our entire life. We decided if we really want to find freedom in our lives, then the best thing we could do is live our life in a manner that's more consistent with the philosophy of liberty. And since then, we've focused on what we call the philosophy of sovereign living, which essentially is the idea that we ought not live our lives in a manner where we're dependent on centralized or coercive institutions. And right now we're working on a reality show called Sovereign Living, has the same name. We're going to be screening episodes 3, 4, and 5 on Saturday night at 9 o'clock in the pavilion next to the pool. And the reality show basically shows our trials and tribulations, ups and downs, struggles to try to become self-sufficient, to grow our own food. Episode 3 features our natural home birth. Episode 2 is about dealing with neighbor problems, with community problems without relying on the police. The 4th episode is about alternative currencies, and it was filmed here at PorcFest. The 5th episode is about natural health. So I'm going to use this talk today, which was called Getting Off the Grid, to highlight some different areas where we can get off the grid and just talk about some of the stuff that we've been through, some of the practical side of things, and also touch on some different areas to get off the grid, and also talk about getting off the government grid, because I think it's important that we strive towards self-sufficiency and sustainability as much as we can when it comes to food, water, energy, shelter, but I think it's equally as important that we work on getting outside of the government grid as well, whether it's healthcare, defense, justice, education for our children. So, and I've only been on this path to growing my own food and doing the farming and stuff for about 3.5 years or so, 3 years. And boy, have I learned a lot in that time. It's very difficult. How many people are off the grid? All right. We'll learn a lot from you guys. How many people are growing food? Cool. How many people are interested in becoming more self-sufficient? They're not yet taking that leap. They haven't grown any food. Cool. All right. It's a mixed crowd. So I'll just talk a little bit about my experience, and then we could use that to convey some ideas, some beginner stuff, and then maybe we could strike up a conversation to hear some advice from people on how they've managed to get all the way off the grid. And again, I think it's important that we strive. So it's like over here we have 100% off the grid, 100% sustainable, and on the political side, completely living a voluntary life outside of all the political channels. And so we may not all be able to reach this point, and that's okay. But I think it's important that we take steps constantly to come closer to those areas off the grid when it comes to energy, food, shelter, and off the grid when it comes to relying on alternative institutions and voluntary community association to solve our common problems rather than big government or big corporate solutions. So probably about 3 years ago, Kat and I started gardening by simply growing vegetables in containers in the backyard, a place where she was staying out near the lake in Austin, Texas. And it was just a container garden, like 10 to 12 pots. I think that's the best place to start. Anybody could do that, really. And there's no better time to start that type of thing than now. A lot of people believe, a lot of my background comes from the whole conspiratorial side of things. I used to be a huge Alex Jones fan, and he's always advertising the survival seed bank. Get yours today. Crap's going to hit the fan. You'll be okay. And so I have a feeling there's a bunch of people that are like, I got my survival seed bank in the closet. When the grocery stores are out of food, I'll be all right. I have my seeds. They'll make me food. But anybody that's tried to grow food knows it's kind of tough. It's not the easiest, especially if you're in a difficult climate. Up here, I imagine it's pretty damn hard in the winter. You probably don't really have a grow season in the winter unless you got a greenhouse going. Down in Texas, we have extreme summers, and every summer to date has completely decimated our entire crops. We've managed to sneak through a few of the crops through the summer seasons. Also, every summer, Catherine and I come up to PorcFest, and we leave our garden in the hands of our friends and roommates, and they don't tend to the crops as well as we do. And I don't tend to the crops as well as Catherine does. It's like a trickle-down thing. But it's hard. So if there's anybody that's, on the fence, or they're waiting to start, or they have that survival seed bank, they think they'll be able to just throw the seeds out in the backyard and grow food, you got to start now. And as I was saying, a simple container garden is one of the easiest ways to do things. Or just clear out a plot in your backyard, fertilize the soil with compost, preferably from your own. Start a little composting bin, or even just get some nutrient-dense soil from your local garden store. And just start trying to grow some tomatoes or some corn, just some simple crops. Okra grows really well. Every different region has different crops that grow really well. Start with those and show to yourself that you can take something from seed to fruit, because it's not always that easy. You could grow like the biggest, beautiful corn stalks, and then the corn comes out, and it's like, man, this is a pretty pathetic piece of corn. But I'm going to eat it anyway, It's tough. So that's where I would start. If anybody hasn't grown any food yet, just start small, start simple, and show yourself that you can do it. The internet is a wonderful resource. Friends are the best resource, in my opinion. If you even have someone in your neighborhood, or if you have someone that's into gardening or survivalist, link up with them, and you'll find that most people are always ready and willing and very proud to share their stories and to show off their garden and teach you everything they can. There's a couple books that I think are really valuable resources for beginners and experts alike. One of them is a Square Foot Gardening. Who's the author of that book? Anybody know? Mel Bartholomew. Square Foot Gardening. It's in multiple editions now. It'll show you how to set up a simple square foot raised bed garden where you use companion planting, and that you plot it out into square feet. Each vegetable has its own best practice as far as how many to plant within a square foot. So that's a great resource to start with, How to Grow More Vegetables by Mel Bartholomew. Then a little more of an intermediate and advanced book is How to Grow More Vegetables. How to Yield More Vegetables. Anybody familiar with that book, How to Grow More Vegetables? It's a larger book. This one introduces the concept of double digging, which is a pretty labor-intensive technique, but it allows you to get some really strong soil. And it has a lot of great information on companion planting, which is planting different vegetables next to one another that complement one another. For example, there's Three Sisters, which is corn, beans, and squash. And these are grown next to one another, and each plant has its own little characteristics that makes it beneficial to the plants next to it. The corn grows up, the beans can grow up the corn, the squash provides cover to avoid weeds. I think the beans add a lot of nutrients that the corn thrives off of into the plants. So there's a lot of these different relationships that you'll find, and that book covers those really well. There's also antagonists, plants that you don't want to plant next to one another. So those two books are something that I would recommend anybody have, whether you're just beginning or you're already well into growing food. There's a lot of rich resources within those books. So there's a few different types of garden beds that people can grow. You can start with just tilling up the soil and planting straight in the ground. If you're lucky, you'll live in an area that already has fertile soil that hasn't been depleted or harmed. If you're like renting a place or you haven't been on the property for a while, it might be worth your while to try to investigate and see if there was a lot of chemicals added to the soil. Because if you're trying to grow natural, organic, arrest that man, how dare he use that word. We'll call it organics with an X. That's what my buddy does. He has a little company called Central Texas Organics with an X. To hell with you, FDA. It's an X. It's not a C. You can't take me away because of that little detail there. But I digress. So, yeah, check with the soil. If the soil isn't very nutrient dense, which most likely it won't be, it's very important that you work to create rich soil. And you do that by supplementing the soil with compost. We like to use horse manure. If there's a horse farm or just somebody that has horses in the area, they'll most likely gladly let you come and scoop their poop. They won't charge you a dime for it. And we found that the horse manure does really well on the soil. You also don't want to put stuff that's too fresh and hot straight onto the plants because it could actually literally burn the plants and hurt them. But work on maintaining strong, nutrient-dense soil. The book How to Grow More Vegetables has a lot to do with that. And again, rely on your friends and resources on the internet, but it's absolutely integral that you maintain high nutrient-dense soil, and you got to work at it, and it could take several growing seasons. One thing that we like to do is just let our plants volunteer, which is when you kind of just let the garden bed just let loose, and you let it go to seed, it drops the seeds, and then it starts coming back every season. And before you know it, you'll be seeing things from seasons ago that came back, and they'll be a lot stronger plants too as they grow and as they go through multiple generations. But we also just let the dead plants just lie there and die, and the plant matter decays, and it creates its own composting effect. So work hard on the soil. So the first way that you could do is till the land, and you could do simple row crops. Doesn't take much time to prepare the bed. Another thing, as I mentioned before, is raised bed gardens, where you can use long boards. Sometimes the boards, though, you'll find after a lot of rain, they'll start to warp or they'll start to deteriorate. So what we've used for our raised bed gardens is cinder blocks. You can get them at the local hardware store. You could find them on Craigslist for really cheap. And the cinder blocks are really easy. You could dig down and do 2 layers of cinder blocks and cement them if you want to have the moisture be retained a little more. Also, digging down creates an environment where it's if you have extreme heat or extreme cooling, it helps on both sides. And then a cool thing you could do is plant companion plants or even flowers to attract bees to pollinate the plants in the little outside squares of the cinder blocks. So we found cinder blocks are a quick way to get those beds started. Another thing you could do is just use big pieces of logs and stuff from around the property and get creative. So raised bed garden is a great way to grow yourself some beds. There's a few other ways that are a little more conservative and that will require less maintenance. One of those is called hugelkultur, which I think is German for mound, something mound. But essentially it's growing food by using deteriorating logs and wood. And so essentially what you do is you can either dig a hole or just build it straight from the ground, but go around your property or down the road if there's some down logs, haul them over, throw them in the truck, pile up a bunch of wood, however high. It could be 4 feet high, it could be 1 foot high. You could dig down 2 feet and put them in there so it only pops out of the soil a little bit. But the idea is you pile on the wood, you pile on some compost within it, some really nice soil, pat it all down, plant it, and what takes place is the wood underneath the soil retains moisture. It soaks up like a sponge. And then also as the wood deteriorates, it leaks out nutrients into the plants. So this is a great way to create an environment where you don't have to water as much, which is especially important for climates like down in Texas when we have extreme droughts. We found we built some raised bed, cinder block beds that were kind of a hugelkultur-esque style where we had a bunch of wood and twigs filling the entire whole of the bottom of them. And then we also built some that didn't have the wood, and we found that we had to water the hugelkultur beds 75% less than the other beds. So we were only out there watering like once a week or so, and they were doing just fine and thriving. If you look up online, you'll find big mounds that are like even the size of this table, a huge mound. Then you have like 3D space to grow on as well. You can grow up on the sides and on the top. So hugelkultur is a really great way that's less labor intensive and less water intensive to grow your food. And again, it leaks out the nutrients. Another exciting way to grow food that requires minimal maintenance is called a wicking bed. This essentially is where you set up what's like a raised bed garden. People use pallets. So you get square of 4 pallets. You could build it out as a rectangle or whatever size you like. You line the inside with political signs people like to use, or any type of plastic. This is actually a good use for political signs, more than cheering on people to go vote. So you line it with political signs. Then you line the bottom with a plastic tarp. Then you fill the bottom maybe half foot or so with broken glass or pebbles or something. This will hold water at the bottom. It's a reservoir. Then you lay a sheet. I think there's something called wicking sheets, I think. There's a type of sheet that you can lay that allows the water to go through, but not the soil. Then you pop the soil on top of that. You have a PVC pipe that goes down into the water reservoir. There's also a drainage pipe at the top of your water reservoir for whenever it gets too high, it drains out the side. And essentially with this wicking bed, all you have to do is grab your water hose or your waterer and just pour the water into the PVC pipe, and it fills the reservoir, and that's it. And you could literally water the bed like once every 2 weeks or so. This is a super easy way, minimal maintenance to grow vegetables. It's called a wicking bed. There's actually a really cool group based out of Austin, Texas called the Food is Free Project, and they're featured in the 3rd episode of our reality show. We go visit them. And they build these beds all up and down the streets in people's front yards and neighborhoods, and they encourage neighbors to go garden each other's beds. So it's like, hey, you have a wicking bed in your front yard, and you grow tomatoes. I have one in my front yard, and I grow jalapenos. So I'm going to go pick your tomatoes. You can come pick my jalapenos. It's a great way to grow community and grow food at the same time. So that's a wicking bed. And then the other type of bed I want to mention is aquaponics, which is really exciting. Essentially, how many of you have ever heard of aquaponics? Cool, yeah, aquaponics is a really cool way to grow food that's pretty damn close to sustainable. Essentially, it's you have a grow bed, and then you have a fish tank. And the water from the fish, which is fertilized with the fish poo, gets pumped up into the grow bed, and it feeds the plants. The plants filter out the poo, and it gets deposited back into your fish tank. And it creates a sustainable cycle where it's really, really conservative when it comes to the water use. The only thing you have to worry about is a little bit of evaporation. This is a system that people can take advantage of in an apartment. You could set something up like this in your kitchen and grow herbs or grow. So I've heard tomatoes are hard to grow in aquaponic systems. Leafy greens are really easy to grow in aquaponic systems. So this is something, even if you don't have property, you could set one of these up in your home or on your back porch or in your backyard, which I think is exciting. So those are 4 different types of beds that I think are really valuable. Just straight tilling the land and getting it planted in the soil. Again, make sure you amend the soil immensely to have nice, healthy, nutrient-dense soil. The next one is the raised bed garden, hugel culture, wicking bed, and aquaponics. It's 5 different techniques that people can explore, and different ones have different benefits for different parts of the country. Another thing on the realm of food production, I think that's really easy way to get a lot of food, a lot of protein, is chickens. Chickens, we've found, were easier to raise and to get food from than growing vegetables. Far easier. At one point, we had up to like 120 chickens on our 2.5-acre farmstead, and they were all free range. They just hung out. You know, every once in a while, they'd get killed by dogs. And in fact, about 20 got killed by our roommate's dog. That was the biggest source. At PorcFest last year while we were here, this is Catherine, my wife, and kiddos. Yeah, Kat was having nightmares about the chickens like struggling and dying, and we go home, and not only had a bunch of them been killed by the dogs, but a bunch of them got this sickness. What's it called? The craw or some respiratory thing that's pretty common among chickens, and it was flock wide. This is when we had like 80 or 90, 100 chickens. It was devastating. Yeah, nobody's going to take care of your chickens or your plants as well as you. So it was a disaster. We came home. We tried to cure it with just colloidal silver, which we found giving our livestock and our dogs and our kiddos and ourselves colloidal silver usually just wipes out all sorts of infections. But it wasn't strong enough, and we actually had to use antibiotics, which we struggled with. We wanted to, stay away from all that, avoid all that, but the chickens were literally dropping dead, so we felt that it was the right move, lest we lose our entire flock. But yeah, like I said, we were up to about 120 chickens. We started with 8, I believe. Then we slowly started supplementing, buying some from random farms here and there, and then we started hatching our own chickens with an incubator. So all you got to do is buy like a $80, $120 incubator. We bought one called the Octagon, And this thing worked wonders. We also bought some of the traditional styrofoam ones that are like $30 or $40. Maybe you've seen them. They don't work very well. So they fail. They have a higher fail rate. Sometimes none of the chickens hatch, none of the eggs hatch at all. Yes. Why didn't you let your hens sit on the eggs? We did both. So we prefer. There's two ways that eggs can be hatched. One is by the mother hen sitting on the egg. It's called brooding. And there's characteristics you can find when you realize that, okay, this mother hen is in brood mode. We want to leave those eggs. They'll be a little more aggressive when you go to grab the eggs. Sometimes they'll peck at your hands, and you'll find that they hover there. They stay there. They only leave every once in a while to go get food or to go relieve themselves. So when they're brooding, you want to leave them alone. If you have a safe environment, just leave them be. Some people move the brooding mother and the eggs into a smaller cage, but I think sometimes that disrupts the process, and the mother doesn't like it, and sometimes she doesn't stick around. You can create your little egg laying boxes in a way that you could kind of cage off the brooding mothers so they're left alone and so they don't go away. So yeah, we prefer the natural births, the brooding hens, and the eggs. We would always collect the chicks and then bring them in and put them in our what do you call it? The spot for the chicks. There's a name for the brooder. Put them in a brooder, and but there was one chick actually that we just left alone. We were never able to catch it, and we said, all right, let's just try an experiment, see if it could survive, and it survived all the way to adulthood. It survived all the predators. So yeah, if you want to watch for that, and if the mother hen is brooding, that's preferable. But that's a slower process, and sometimes the chicks don't make it. Sometimes the brooding mother isn't a good mother and abandons the eggs and stuff like that. So that's why we also use an incubator where you put the eggs in the incubator. You maintain a temperature of like 91 or 97 degrees, and we, with this octagon machine, had a hatch rate of like 95%. We'd pop in 20 eggs, and every month or so we'd have 99.5, and every month or so we'd have 18 new chicks that hatch out. Yes, sir. That's a breed? What's the breed? It's a Banty. It's a smaller chicken. Okay. But they're great mothers. All right. Excellent. Cool. Silkies. Yeah, there's certain breeds we found that do well in climates and that do better things. One of the things that we like is whenever you hatch your own eggs, rather than supplementing, rather than getting all your chickens from a store or from a farm, you hatch them on your own property. They start breeding amongst one another, and you create breeds that are really resilient for your particular climate. And that's something that we had. Our chickens were able to weather the storm or weather the heat really well. But chickens, you get eggs. Even if you have a dozen chickens, you could go out every day and have like 6 to 8 eggs or more if it's ideal situation, if they're happy chickens. Keep them happy too. Talk to them, make sure they're well fed and watered. Keep predators away. Even if a friend brings a dog over and the dog wants to sniff around, like keep the dog out of there, because that makes the chickens anxious, and when they're anxious, they're not going to lay as well. So not only can you have the eggs, which is a wonderful source of protein, you could bake with them. We eat like 10 eggs a day, our family. Sometimes the kiddos would eat more eggs than mama and dada when they're growing. You could barter with these eggs too. Like Ben Bernanke or Yellen, whoever the new Fed chair is, who the hell cares? They have a printing press. They create money in the Federal Reserve Bank. We had a printing press in the backyard with the eggs, because we would barter them for silver dimes, or we would barter them for other vegetables and stuff like that. So eggs are a wonderful currency. Everybody likes eggs, and people are willing to trade for eggs. On top of that, if you learn how to slaughter the chickens, man, that's a wonderful meat source. And we felt really secure when we had 100-plus chickens. We knew that if crap were to hit the fan, if the grocery stores were to be down, not only do we have this wonderful source of protein through the eggs, but we'll be able to supply ourselves with meat, with soup too. You do the soup, the bone soup, and that's wonderful for helping fight off infection and helping fight off all sorts of sickness. It really helps your immune system. Hey, Bill. Talking about chickens. You want to come up here with me? We give when the kids get a little bit sick, we give them the chicken broth. We'll see how this goes. And it works wonders. And so, yeah, I think chickens are a wonderful, valuable source of growing food. Unfortunately, we were doing our self-sufficiency project on a house that we were renting, and we were month to month on the lease, which I thought was cool because I felt free, like, oh, yeah, we're not tied down. I should have realized we have a lot of food production going on, so we probably want to be tied down. But the house was in. There was a lot of problems with the house. This is something that'll be covered in the 6th episode of our reality show. And the house was, kind of falling apart. And rather than fix the house, the landlord simply gave us a 30-day notice. So we had to vacate our property that we had just done 2.5 years worth of growth on and 3 years worth of food production on. So that was devastating. Thankfully, we found another farmstead and we packed up our operation. We moved it to the other farmstead. But we had to give away a lot of our chickens, and we sent them off to like 3 different farms. One of the farms was in San Marcos, Texas, where we moved. And thankfully, we built a relationship with them where they kept like 50 of our chickens. And then every week at the farmer's market, we would pick up a few dozen eggs. So we were still eating the eggs on our chickens, which was great. They ended up being overwhelmed by the 50 chickens, and they had to give them back to us. So we quickly built a coop in a wooded area on a coop and a large fence. I wish they had a larger area. They're not free range anymore, and the place that they were at, it was a massive fence, but they weren't free range. And you could tell a difference in the quality of eggs. The shells were thinner. They weren't as tasty. The yolks were not as deep orange and really strong color. And they just didn't look happy, and they looked a little more worn down. Their feathers didn't really poof up. So if you have the opportunity to free range, I think it's definitely worth it and valuable, but you got to keep an eye on those predators. You'll probably lose a few birds here and there. But thankfully, we got about 45 of our birds back, so we still have some of those same birds out at a different property. Yes?
A couple questions. One was, you mentioned predators. Did you have a lot of aerial depredation?
Yes, we had hawk attacks for a while. Yeah.
Anything you could do about that?
Outside of sitting out back with a shotgun, no, there wasn't really anything we could do. One thing we did, birds are terrible predators. Dogs are terrible predators as well. We never had any problem with coyotes, although you could always hear them off in the distance. I don't know if y'all have coyotes up here in New Hampshire. Yeah, I bet foxes are pretty hard to deal with, too, because they're so small and sly, like Obama. No, we just let them. We had it was a shed, a large shed, and they would just go in naturally. Some of them would roost in the trees as well, but we wouldn't close them up. But a lot of people free range, and then the chickens naturally go to the safe spot at night, and you just close the door. And that's still free range. You're just protecting them at night. But yeah, hawks are a terrible predator. One thing that we did was build 2 pallets. We built teepees. We just were sure that they had areas, because they know when the hawks are coming. They're keeping watch. And the roosters, if you have a good rooster, he'll alert the entire flock. Like, there's a predator in the area. Everyone be ready. And they just go underneath their little shelters. So if you do have a problem with aerial birds, it's a good idea to spend a significant amount of time building them some areas where they can run and hide and stay safe. It's always good to have good tree coverage, too. The hawks won't be able to penetrate down through the trees. But if you do have general open areas, you could supplement the space by building structures for them.
You segued into my second question. Roosters, do you particularly believe that fertilized eggs are better?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we kept roosters. Every once in a while, we'd have to cull the rooster population. Things would turn into like a high school prom, and the roosters are pretty ruthless. They're almost as cruel as humans. Chickens are nasty to each other. If there's a weak chicken, you either have to go ahead and slaughter it or take it to its own coop, because the other ones will just destroy it, and they'll peck out its back, and it's just really sad, some of the things that happen. That's why it's really important that you maintain a good ratio of roosters to hens. And if your population starts getting too big, maybe start another coop off in a different area of your property. He's like, I want some chickens. I think it was like 8-1 or 10-1, somewhere around there. Sometimes a natural ratio would come about where some of the chickens and roosters would just get booted out of the flock, and they're all of a sudden hanging out in the front yard, shitting all over the sidewalk in our little hangout area. I always had a lot of struggle with the chicken poo everywhere, because we didn't have a fence around our back porch at first, and we were never able to hang out on our back porch because the chickens were always hanging out there. But yeah, maintaining a good ratio is good, and that's where the slaughtering comes in. So, we have too many roosters, no big deal. Now we have some more food. Some of the roosters are a little more muscular than the big hens, so they're not as good for meat. But you could always do soup with those, or you could do soup with smaller birds as well. So, does anybody have any questions on chickens? We feed them with just normal grain feed that we buy from the store down the road from Callahan's. We tried to buy all organic feed for a while, but it totally broke the bank. It was like $40 a bag compared to $12 a bag. So we're like, that's why I always say, like, I'd strive to be 100% gluten free, 100% organic all the way. I would love to have 100% organic fed birds, but so we just. But when they're free range, you don't have to feed them as much because they're going out and digging up their own grubs and eating their own critters. Something people do is grow like little food forests with a bunch of ground crops and crops that grow really well on their own. You just go out and plant them all over town, and it's not food for you, it's food for the chickens, so they can come naturally, just eat their own food. That's a wonderful way to supplement it. But yeah, we would just use normal feed. Ideally, if you want to have a strong, sustainable system, you either partner up with the farm next door if they're growing some type of feed that you could use, or you grow your own feed for the chickens. Because if crap hits the fan and we no longer had that resource of chicken feed, our chickens wouldn't have been as happy. They would have survived, I'm sure. They would have maybe ventured out a little further, which means they would have been more vulnerable. But we would have had to spend a considerable amount of time growing food for them. So I think it's important to go ahead and my whole philosophy is let's not wait until crap hits the fan to do all this stuff. Let's do it now. It's a general preparedness philosophy. Go ahead and start growing the crops that you can anticipate feeding them, and if you go ahead and have that all done, then you don't have to pay as much money, and it's a lot more sustainable. Anything else on chickens? Chickens are great. Like half a dozen chickens in your backyard. If you live in a residential area, if there's like a covenant, or if you have a neighborhood association that says no chickens. This is a political crowd. Everyone seems to be active and stuff. I think it wouldn't be that difficult for you to get a band of neighbors together and go to the meetings and actually change that. I don't. Preferably without. City ordinances, too. This is something that's so ridiculous. It's one of those laws, rules, edicts that ought not be there, and I don't even think a super majority of the people want that not to happen. Just be friends with your neighbors. And you don't have to have a rooster. Rooster would be the only noise pollution, and maybe if the neighbors really don't like it, maybe it would be courtesy on your behalf to go ahead and give your roosters up or slaughter your roosters. The chickens will be safe. You just got to keep a better eye on them. But if you have neighbors that are a little bit upset about it, start bringing them eggs. They're not going to complain anymore. They're getting farm fresh eggs every week. Yes, sir. Yeah. I don't know exactly how. We had 2.5 acres and 100 chickens at once, and they still had plenty of space. And they only stuck to maybe like a area that was about a fifth of the whole property. Yeah. What I was going to say is they still had the opportunity, if they wanted to go into what we called the way back, the back 40, which was really like the back 1.5 acres. Uh, I suspect they'd probably be fine on a couple acres, a good amount of chickens on a couple acres. I don't think they would need much area, but it all depends on how fertile and how much stuff's going. That's another reason why we would never mow the whole property. My parents would come over. Why don't you mow the lawn, John? I'm like, that's not our style, Mom. Not only that, we don't have time to mow the lawn. But create an environment where it's just growing natural, and kind of go back to the way that it was before it was developed. And they'll just be plants popping up, and there'll be bugs everywhere, and it'll be more of a natural ecosystem, and you could bet that there'll be more grubs and critters for them to eat. But I don't know how to answer that question. You'd have to experiment, and you could always, again, supplement them with feed if need be. Yes, that's right. Yeah, so sometimes you want to throw your kitchen scraps to the compost, but sometimes it's more important to feed your chickens with the compost. And we found when they're eating a lot of our scraps and our vegetables that we throw out, or vegetables that decomposed or got obliterated by caterpillars or something, you're going to tell it. There'll be a noticeable difference in the eggs. Like I said, when we had them at the other farm that was completely fenced off and 100% feed only, because it was a giant fenced area. And they had like 60 chickens, 80, 70 chickens in each one. It was probably like 3 times this space, which is a pretty good amount of space. They had a lot of space in there. They weren't on top of one another. But all of the ground was dirt because they'd already scratched everything up. There's nothing else for them to eat but the feed. And we got the eggs back, and you could crack the egg open by just pushing your finger through. And then after we brought them to our farm and started throwing them the compost, and there was fewer chickens, although the space wasn't as big. We're going to expand the space. It was no time. Actually, one thing Kat did was, for a while, that she took all their eggs and fed them their own eggs and just cracked them all. They came and ate it. They ate the shells and everything. and then like a week later, total difference. The shells were back to their. I don't think they fully recovered from when they were totally happy in free range mode, but they were much better. So yeah, supplement them with the even before the compost. If the chickens are one of your primary food production sources, you go ahead and give them the compost. What they don't eat, put that in the compost pile. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we would crush them up and create a nice little mixture of the eggs and the shells. Yeah, sure. Yeah, and sometimes they wouldn't even eat them because it's I guess they're it's biologically trained and not to do that. But yeah, crush them up. I would just sit there and throw them in the little thing. Cat takes the time to crush them up and chop them. I got to tend to the kids. I'm just gonna throw them in. Yes.
When you're rearranging your chickens, how do you know what to, how do you know how much to supplement, if to supplement, other than dropping dead with just bony chickens?
Haha.
How do you know that you need to feed them supplementally?
They'll tell you when they're hungry. You walk out to the backyard and they all rush up.
Well, aren't they always that way?
I think they tend to be if you have them regularly fed. So we would try to experiment. Like my roommate, Paul, he's featured in our reality show. He'd be like, man, these chickens are getting spoiled, and he would try to hold off on feeding them, kind of forcing them to go forage. But they weren't very happy with that. So we just, if they're hungry, we feed them. We weren't able to actually experiment to see exactly, I didn't want to test the limits or anything. We just fed them every time they would come around. So I don't know if I could give you a strong answer to that question. But yeah, just go on their cues. Maybe it'd be good to have them in an area and feed them minimally first, so they have to go find out on their own where the food sources are. Then you start supplementing them. Let them get a little bit hungry. Then they'll naturally go out and forage, and maybe they'll find this area of the property is a little more fertile. Then you start supplementing their food. But okay, I'm going to move on to a couple other things. We can go back to chickens. Yeah, they could fly over a fence. Some people clip their wings. We don't like to clip wings or even declaw our cats or anything like that. But if you really wanted to, you could clip the wings and they wouldn't be able to fly over the fence. But if they're happy enough and if they have no reason to leave, then they probably won't escape. If they do, just talk to your neighbors. Is it like a residential area? Talk to your neighbors and say, hey, it's possible one of my chickens might hop over the fence. If they do, please give me a call, or make sure the neighbors don't have dogs and stuff like that. And if the neighbors are cool, it's not the end of the world if a chicken flies over. We always have these philosophical discussions of whether because we try to be as consistent as possible. We don't want to enslave animals. We don't cage animals. We don't leave our dogs in kennels or anything like that. So we have this idea like, well, we let the dogs run around off leash. They don't run away. So they're voluntarily here with us. Same thing with the chickens. They're here. We're not the masters of the chickens per se, although we slaughter them. But you'll find that the chickens will most likely be content. It'll be their home, and they won't really want to leave because you're the one feeding them and protecting them and giving them water. So even if they hop over to go explore, if you're keeping them happy with enough food, and if they're not on top of one another, they'll likely just come back. And then again, bring the neighbor over some eggs and say, hey, it's possible the chickens might hop over the fence. Or you can just extend the fence up another 5 feet or so. They shouldn't be able to jump over 10 to 12 feet, even if they have their wings clipped. And again, if you want, you could clip the wings. If you can control predators, then they need the wings so they could jump away and fly away from a predator if they need to. But I don't think it's very humane, but it is a way to avoid them from escaping over the fence. Okay, another thing we could touch on real quick is food storage and water storage. One thing that we built in our backyard was a 255-gallon water storage system that was super simple to do. Anybody could do this. It was essentially five 55-gallon drums stacked up next to one another, with the first drum a little higher than the next drum. The next drum was a little lower, next drum was a little lower, next drum was a little lower. Then we built a rain gutter coming off of our shed, our chicken coop. The water would pour in, fill up the first drum. Then we had an overflow spout that poured into the next barrel. So once the first one filled up, it would pour into the next one. Once that one filled up, all the way down the line. So this could be done, with 10 55-gallon drums. Get yourself 550 gallons. Super simple. We have it. It's featured in our reality show. You could check out. That's a simple way to set up water storage. Water storage is very important and crucial. If you want to water your plants with the rainwater, they're definitely going to thrive compared to watering them with the municipal water, which has like radium in it and chlorine and fluoride. So I think it's hard to have truly organic plants when you're watering them with crap water that has all sorts of weird chemicals and radioactive material. But it's okay to drink and shower in, of course. We try to filter all of our waters as much as possible, and we're strong activists against municipal fluoridation, trying to get that reversed in Austin. One thing that Kat and I did that was really great for water storage is every time you have bottled waters or a plastic thing of tea or any jugs, just fill them up in the tap or from your rainwater and put them in a closet. And after about 2 or 3 months, we had an entire closet just chock full of plastic bottles that were full of water. And now crap didn't hit the fan. Every once in a while, our municipal water service would go out, and we didn't have water to brush our teeth or to boil eggs in, or to, bathe, to wash yourself down with. So we just started pulling out the water, even to fill the toilet with. So this is something that anybody could do, and before you know it, you can have a considerable amount of water stored. Super simple. So again, just every plastic bottle you get, your used tea, large bottles of water, just fill it up with water, put it in a dark place. Some people say to cycle through that water so the plastic doesn't deteriorate. Sometimes BPA leaches in it as well. Another thing you could do is take that water, run it through the filter if you're going to be drinking or cooking with it. But if it's toilet water, it doesn't really matter. If you're brushing your teeth with it, it's not that big of a deal. It's an excellent way to store a good amount of water. Yes. No, we don't do any distilling. No, but that would be a great way to have longer-term water. Yes. Rarely freezes in Austin. Yeah. It's really hot. A couple summers ago, we had 40 consecutive days of 100-plus degree weather. It was hardcore. Yeah. So last year I signed the Free State Project letter of intent, and we're not going to move up here full time. I'm not going to say we're not going to, actually, because who knows? If this turns into a libertarian oasis, I'd be foolish not to bring my family up here. But we want to flock up here for the summertime and spend half of the year or a quarter of the year up here and enjoy the beautiful summers up here, because it is hellish in Texas, and it's really hard to grow food as well. Food storage is really important. Of course, you can start with buying these bulk food storage things. These companies that do food storage, buy that in mass, keep it in a nice, cool, dark place. We like to dehydrate food, and we dehydrate chicken jerky. Get extra food at the farmer's market or extra food that you grow and dehydrate it. We started getting into canning a little bit. We're not experts when it comes to canning. Does anybody do canning in the room? Yeah. How's that worked out for you? Yeah. Cool. Yeah. It's all experimenting. Hmm. Yeah. Uh huh. Yes. Yeah. It's always good to have a variety. Uh huh. Sure. Uh. Oh yeah. Eventually. Good thinking. Yes. Redundancy. Redundancy is key for self-sufficiency, survivalism. It's always good to have multiple different systems. Like when I started with the grow beds, build each one of the types of beds and experiment with them. See which one works and which one doesn't. Do food dehydrating. Do traditional food storage that you buy from a third party. Do canning and bottling, and just do it all and learn at least the basics. I like to say, like, I'm not an expert in one particular area, but I like to have a general foundation of knowledge in a whole multitude of different areas, so you at least know how to get started in that area. And if crap hits the fan, you're not going to have much to do but grow food and make sure that you're feeding yourself and staying safe. So that's the time when you could really dig down, but at least be confident enough to start off these different processes And I think now's the time to experiment with as many different things as we possibly can. We had a rounder plastic system. I forget what it was called. It was a simpler one, maybe cost $100. It was my roommate's. That's what we used for a while. I actually dehydrated my wife's placenta and put it into, turned it into placenta pills, and she ate those to deal with some postpartum stuff. That's featured in the 3rd episode of our reality show. If you want to check that out, you could watch it there. It was great for reality TV. It's interesting for me. And it was my roommate's dehydrator. He didn't mind, though. He's a nice guy. But we recently bought one. I wish I could tell you the brand. It's a larger cube one. This one costs about $250. It has a lot more space, and it works awesome. It's one that has like 8 different trays. Excalibur, that's the one that it is, yes. Oh, cool. Great. It's electric, yeah. It doesn't use very much energy to run. When's your class? 1 o'clock? Where's that? You right here? Cool. And what's your name? Judy. Judy's teaching a class on dehydrating right here. It's fun. It tastes great. Lasts forever. The kids love we put little mangoes and pineapples and stuff, and the kids eat it just like candy. And they love it. It's like a treat. We don't have to go, we try not to feed them candy too often and sweets, so this is a wonderful sweet thing. They feel like it's a treat. It's actually really healthy for them. But yeah, we use the Excalibur system. It's great. It's really strong, sturdy. It works well, and you can experiment with all sorts of cool stuff. I guess we have about 10 more minutes. I'll touch real briefly on a couple other things, and then we could just keep talking and have some discussion. A lot of people focus on getting off the grid when it comes to self-sufficiency, food, water, shelter. But I like to take it a step further and talk about getting off the government grid in all sorts of different ways. And this also has to do with survivalism as well. One way we can get off the government grid is work our way out of the state-backed, centralized, allopathic, Western medical health insurance system. Even though Obama and the federal government are trying to force you into health insurance, we don't have health insurance. We try to save money and have silver in case something happens, but we have a strong mutual aid network, and I would like to see more communities strive towards an environment where if something happens to one of their members, one of their community members, the other people come in and help them out and help through the medical bills and stuff like that. So I think it's really important that we build institutions, that we build cooperatives where we can one day say, you know what, we don't need to rely on this profit, greed-driven, not that there's anything wrong with profit. Try to avoid being greedy if you can. But the whole system, obviously, it's built to benefit the insurers and the pharmaceutical industrial complex and the hospitals. So I think we could build cooperative, voluntary associations that could just as easily, if not more efficiently and effectively, deal with health problems. And that's something that we're exploring. I'm real big into Bitcoin as well. And there's ways that you could actually utilize the Bitcoin blockchain, which is the public ledger that is the foundation of Bitcoin, in order to create a system where people chip in through escrow accounts to help out with each other's medical bills. So that's something that we're exploring. Getting off the grid also means getting off of government centralized monetary systems. For a while, Catherine and I went to farmers markets and encouraged the vendors to accept silver in exchange for their vegetables. And we found that quite a few were ready and willing to accept silver dimes, called junk silver, pre-1964 and before, dimes, quarters, half dollars. They're comprised of 90% silver. And right now, a silver dime from 1955 is worth like $1.50 or so in silver. So I think it's important to create these networks now, so if the dollar tanks, we'll still be able to engage in trade and commerce. Of course, Bitcoin has been talked a lot about at this event. Liberty Forum here in New Hampshire always has a lot of Bitcoin stuff. It's a digital currency that works with cryptography to solve complex algorithms throughout a peer-to-peer decentralized network to make sure that no one's fraudulently spending money that they don't have. and it has wonderful applications. It's completely outside of the centralized banking system, outside of the Federal Reserve System. So it's a network that's being created voluntarily across the entire globe without any central arbiter or authority. And it's a wonderful network that can continue to thrive and will thrive. And it goes up in value every time governments tank economies, like what happened in Cyprus. So I think that's something important for people to explore. Again, not only getting off the grid and growing your own food, but also using your own money. And then finally, one more thing to touch on, and we could have a few more questions, is not relying on the police to solve our common problems. How many people own firearms in the room? Get it up. If you don't own a firearm, if you live in a state that doesn't allow you to own a firearm, or a city that bans firearms, first thing you could do is get your ass to New Hampshire or Texas or another state that's friendly to firearms, Vermont. But if you're living in Massachusetts or Chicago, so sorry, California, New York City, those seem to be all the cities with high crime rates. What's going on here?